Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So as a piece of that, our goal each week is to bring you something that's hopeful and helpful. So subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Community Church podcast. If you find today's episode hopeful and helpful, then please follow or subscribe, and then rate and review so that more people can find the conversation. In today's episode, I got a chat with the group's director at the Ridge, Joe McFadden. We chat about Lent, the period before Easter, as well as something that you can do every day as part of a prayer routine to really take a chance and examine what does your day look like and how can you grow from the things that you experience in your day. Just a chance to really chat some more with Jesus. And so Joe's going to get into a little bit about what he practices during Lent, as well as sharing what the Prayer of Examen is, how it can help your life, and an example of what to do as you kind of go through some of the steps of it. This is my conversation with Joe. Well, hey, Joe, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, so right now we are in the middle of something called Lent, which for those of you that don't know, Lent is this period about 40 days before Easter. Kind of different denominations throughout practicing Christians have had different interpretations of it throughout time, but it's really based on the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert fasting, and just some historical nature behind it. It was kind of set up to be the 40 days before Easter. I'm curious to you, Joe, we've talked about Lent before. As you think about Lent, what has that meant to you in the past, maybe even this year? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, for me, one of the things that's important for me about Lent is just preparing my heart for Jesus and experiencing him in a new way, a fresh view of him. So for me, sometimes I'll fast different things, but it's not so much about what am I giving up or what am I fasting, but what can I do to help me disconnect from things of the world to connect more meaningfully with God and his kingdom, to prepare my heart and my soul to experience Jesus in a new way in the season. So whether that's, through my daily habits or whether that's through my attitudes and emotions and actions or any of those things I can use as, tools to help me connect more meaningfully with Jesus and experience him in a new and fresh way, especially as I prepare for Easter and celebrating his, life, death, and resurrection. I always like to have a fresh view of that. So, a lot of times I'll do some different reading plans as part of that, and different kind of daily habits and practices that'll help me connect more meaningfully with him.
I love that you don't even talk about the mechanics as much, because people talk about the mechanics of Lent. Are you going to give up this thing or that thing? And there's not that there's anything wrong with that, but I love the heartbeat that's well, what's the actual purpose? What is my true goal here? And it really is this refreshing, I think you said have a new perspective of Jesus, right? Along those lines.
Yeah. And that's very much what it is. How can I view Jesus different, experience Jesus different, be ready to celebrate the resurrection.
Yeah. So part of that reflection on the significance of Jesus, I actually just last week did a podcast with Mark, and we talked about revival and how part of that is starting with your own revival and kind of being willing to ask yourself questions and being willing to go through the hard conversations with yourself in order to really kind of figure out what would your personal revival look like, your own, quote, great awakening of your relationship with Jesus. And so I was thinking, well, that Lent combination, there's this thing called the Prayer of Examen, which I know you've talked with me about before, and I know it's part of your practice. Would you share a little bit about what is the Prayer of Examen?
Yeah, and Prayer of Examen is just simply a way to review your day and through prayer and connect with God as you do so. So it's something that I like to do on a regular basis, especially this time of year as I'm preparing my heart for Jesus and experiencing him different and more meaningfully, the prayer examen is one of those tools that I use to connect with him in a different way. And there's a few different questions that goes along with it. There is a structure that goes with it, but there's so many different ways that you could just make it your own and not have to use a script and just have it be more of a relational prayer with God.
And do you do it at the beginning of the day or like a kind of a take stock at the end of the day?
Yeah, this is something that I like to do at the end of the day, and it's designed and meant for that purpose. So
Yeah.
this isn't like, hey, how I'm starting my day, but it's more almost like a review of my day and
Hmm.
preparing for the next day as well.
And and is this like, and this isn't like a legalistic like list all the ways I fell short, right? It's not so much that as it is a different type of mentality, right?
Yeah, this is very much just in fact, it starts with Thanksgiving and just, you look over the course of your day and
Yeah.
thanking God. So you start with that. Hey, what are the things that, so as I would begin the prayer of examine, I would review my day. And typically toward the end of the day, after the kids are in bed and
Yeah.
I have some quiet
You mean
time.
it's not easy to do with kids running around you? Yeah.
This is something I could either do in silence or put on a little bit of instrumental music or something
Mhm.
to help me center and connect and disconnect my thoughts, from all the busyness of the day to connect with God, and then begin to review my day, just kind of mentally in my head, and begin to have a conversation with God and thanking Him first
Mm.
for just some different things that happen throughout the day or different experiences that I had or things that he's blessed me with, all the different things that come to mind. So as you just begin to spend some time, in fact, maybe the first, 3 to 5 minutes I'm going to
Yeah.
spend in Thanksgiving within that prayer of examine. That's part of uh, just part of the prayer of examine is that starting with that Thanksgiving.
How do you notice that kind of shift your attitude for the rest of the time? Like this moment of really just gratefulness, right?
Yeah, it helps me just remember all the things that I have that comes
Yeah.
from God, which really is so much. Like
Right.
there's so many things that we take for granted that is God is the source of everything that we have, the life that we have, the air that we breathe. And once when you take the time to remember that, it
Mm.
changes your position and who you are in light of who God is,
Mm.
which then gives me a more healthy perspective to enter prayer with.
I did this thing once where I was like, I want to thank God for like really, I say like dumb things, but they're not dumb things. They're like, but like really little things that I like forget. Like, I think I was just doing the other night, like, being like, hey God, thank you for taste buds. You know what I mean? That's like this small little thing when he made us with these taste buds, and it's like, well, I love food, and so I don't know. Anyway, sorry to derail that. But
Yeah, things like that we take for granted, though,
right,
right?
yeah,
Uh, that we can be thankful for. So there's so many things if you begin
yeah.
to just really list that out and reflect on that. The next thing that I like to do with prayer of exam and after just thanking God for different things that He's given me and different things that come to mind is to just ask for God's perspective, a clear view of who I
Mm.
am, how He sees me, not just how I want to see myself, but how I really am.
Yeah.
Because we have this like side of like, hey, I think I'm this way, but
Mm.
we know how we really are once when we peel back the layers of that. So that before I move into the rest of the prayer exam, that the next part of it is just really asking for eyes to see me the way that God sees me and see clearly
Mm.
myself through that lens as well.
And that's a prayer that's really twofold, right? Like be able to see the positive things and the things that are like, well, maybe I can work on this, right? But that's like kind of putting aside your own glasses, whether they're rose colored or not rose colored, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's in fact Psalm 139 verses kind of 23 and 24, just a couple short verses I have internalized, and I
Hmm.
kind of make that my own quite frequently around there. And those verses say, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." That is something else that I use to kind of connect with Scripture, connect with God, and
Yeah.
uh, look at things through His perspective. So then, I just simply review, hey, where have I felt joy? What's something that troubled me during the day? What was something that maybe challenged me? Um, you know, did I did I pause throughout the day? Did I notice God's presence in any way throughout the day? How did I experience God? Or then from there, I begin to look and see, hey, were there opportunities that I missed?
Mm,
Not for the sake of beating myself up, but for the sake of learning and growing. Are
yeah.
there opportunities where I missed God's voice and maybe didn't respond to something that I felt God was challenging me to do or lean into more? So that I can begin to take note of those things.
How do you notice that? Like, is that like something that's just like a natural? And part of that, I'm sure there's practice, right? Of like, that's part of the practice. That's kind of helpful. Is that once you like think about it more, it helps. But like, how do you know if you missed that opportunity?
Yeah, and like you said, part of it is that awareness,
Mm,
and so the more that I enter in trying to be aware, the more
yeah.
aware I become, so that then the next day I become more aware of God's presence, and then times where I didn't engage with His presence. But beyond that, it's a lot of times God's Spirit will bring to remembrance
Mm,
different things during that prayer as I begin to reflect on my day, and I just kind of review my day kind of mentally and go through, from waking up to then, getting ready for the day to then, coming to work and, going home and just different things like that and look at how did I show up in the different relationships that, because part of it is we can miss God and just how we're simply showing up. Were we
mm,
present? Was I
yeah.
was I present in some of the different relationships throughout the day, or did I miss opportunities to connect with people that were around me? Did I treat people in my life as background scenery in my life rather than connecting with them as image bearers of God? And just there's so
Mm,
many different things then that I can begin to look at throughout the day to see, or did I experience God through someone else? And did I lean into a
mm.
moment to connect with someone and through that see God's image? You know, that would be a simple just kind of view of what it would look like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that's like that opportunity to take stock. And I think if you're rushing so quickly day to day, right, those are things you just wouldn't pick up on, right? Because you just move on to the next thing. But I definitely think they help you going forward though. It's like when you the first time you share like, oh, how was your day? You know, and you think back to that, like the second time somebody asks you that question, it's a lot easier to answer because you've spent time thinking about the first time you got asked the question. So I love that going through that. So what
Yeah.
do you do after you do that? Like kind of take stock.
Yeah, after I take stock, and try to determine, hey, is there anything that I need to confess? Is there anything that I need to repent of? Whether it was, bitterness towards someone or feelings of anger towards someone, or just simply an opportunity that I missed where that now I'm beginning to feel bad about, or
Mm,
there's just so many different things that along that way, or maybe a way I wasn't as kind to someone as I could have been, or more present. Anything like that where I've missed God in the process. In a lot of those cases, it's not necessarily a sin, but I like to keep in mind that if we know the good that we ought to do and we don't do it, then within that it disconnects us from God. And so
mm,
it's like, hey, all right, what are those things where, and it could be not just actions, but attitudes and emotions that we experience throughout the day? Like, were there any attitudes or emotions throughout the day that um, were harmful or, need to be changed, or, that I need God's help and guidance in? All those different things then. So as I've reflected on my day, as I've looked at how I've shown up in relationships, as I begin to reflect on all those things, different things will come to mind, and I'll be reminded of maybe something that I said sarcastically that wasn't necessarily just sarcasm,
yeah.
or whatever, more of
Yeah.
a biting mark or whatever.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, that wasn't really good, different things like that.
The Bible talks so much about just the power of confession and the power of coming clean to God and being very honest and open with Him, and how, I mean, we've experienced this in our own lives, right? When we confess someone, we try to mend a relationship with someone. It hopefully brings more intimacy and a closer relationship. And the thing about like doing that daily, like reflection, being like, God, I don't know if I fully lived up to this right here. Let me just share that with you and be honest. And uh, yeah.
Yeah, there's different times where I like to even reflect on like the fruit of the spirit during that time, and look through like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, or faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, and use those as a way to see, did I reflect God's fruit? Like the fruit of the Spirit, as outlined in Galatians 5, is really God's work in our life. Did I demonstrate God's work in my life, or did I act in a way that was contrary to God's work in my life? Uh, for me, that's also a helpful way of reflecting. It gives me a little bit more of a handle of these are qualities that God gives us to be more like Him. Am I leaning into those, or am I acting contrary to those? And it helps me have a more clear perspective of maybe some things that maybe otherwise wouldn't come to mind.
That's such a great litmus test, because you think about like the moment where all of a sudden you lose your temper or you lose your patience, even if it's something small over like driving. It's like, okay, well, what led me to be in that position? Because I think we like to think that everyone caused us to be that way. When it's coming out of a place in ourselves, right? If we're in a good solid place, those things don't necessarily happen. Um, versus like you're talking about showcasing the fruit of the spirit, like, okay, well, where does this area show me a discrepancy in between what God wants to do in your life? Because we know God wants our lives to be full of joy and patience and gentleness and kindness. And so when we're not showcasing that, that's really good. I like that. Like that's a helpful tool and just quick list of, well, when was I not doing this, or vice versa. I guess you could also do something where like, well, my kid did this and I was patient with them. Like, God,
Right.
how did you make that happen? Yeah.
Yeah, and that could be part of then your Thanksgiving. God, thank you for giving me patience in that moment. And so it's
Mm,
not always negative, where you're just looking for the bad that you did. You're looking for the
yeah.
good, and you're also looking for the parts where maybe you missed the mark.
Mm,
Either way, and you just simply reviewing,
yeah.
well, what ways did you experience God? Which ways did you miss? And then you look ahead at the next day.
Mm,
And so as I look ahead the next day, I can then begin to see how I would like to show up that next day. Even
mm,
before that next day has even begun, I have this like, hey, here's how I would like others to perceive me. Here's how I would like to show up in different relationships I engage in. Here's how I would like to connect with God throughout the day.
mm.
And then I can, before the next day begins, have those intentions. And so then it's just creating that plan the next day, or becoming more and more aware. And the more that you do this, the more increasingly aware you become. The first
Mm,
time that you do this, there may not be a lot of things that come to that list, or that come to mind. But over time, the more aware you become, the more aware of God's presence you become, the more aware you become of how you show up in different relationships. And not that you're going to increasingly get better at it, but you just
well,
become more
maybe,
aware
right?
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so, do you ever like look back on previous, like, do you think back to your last, say, like your last night's prayer of examen during the day? Like, oh, I remember praying that I could be more patient with my kids, or something like that. Does that kind of happen for you, or you kind of reflect and utilize that going forward throughout the day?
Yeah, definitely. That impacts even just how I start my day. Like, hey,
Mm,
today, this is how I want to show up, or these are the things that's important. How I interact with my kids or my spouse or with others. That I come in contact with throughout the day, or just even engaging with people that we could otherwise treat as background scenery in our life, like the
mm,
cashier, or just taking a little bit of more time to connect with the people around me. There's so many different ways that that could impact my day based upon what God has brought to light
Mm.
for me from the previous day. Then I come into the next day with a greater awareness and somewhat of a sense of purpose of who I am and how I can behave or carry myself as a follower of Jesus, not for the sake of appearing a certain way, but because God's created me a certain way in His image. What does that look like to carry that image to the people around me?
Yeah, you say the word purpose, and I kept on thinking of the word like very purposeful. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you're aware, you're able to be more purposeful, right? You're able to purposely have conversations. You're able to purposely react a certain way, and I think that makes a huge difference. I'm curious, how long have you been doing this?
Yeah, I've been using this at least within the last 3 or 4 years
Yeah.
that I've really began to lean into it. Is probably around 2017 or so that I began to use it regularly. So maybe I guess that's
Yeah, maybe a
closer.
little bit longer. Yeah.
A little bit longer.
Yeah. Okay,
Um,
so with that in mind, like how obviously you're still doing it, so you've got to be feeling some fruit from it. How do you feel like it's affected you?
yeah, it has greatly changed just how I carry myself on a day-to-day basis, how patient I am,
Yeah.
and then others begin to notice that even more, or how gentle I am, or so especially as I think through the fruit of the spirit, and I
Mm.
think through those qualities and characters, I have something then to measure up against, or something uh, to look at to see, rather than trying to create a list within my own head of am I hitting this mark or not. I can see, all right, in what ways is God's character growing within me, not something that I'm producing myself, but in what ways am I
Mm.
allowing God to produce that character in me, or in what ways am I hindering that? And so over time, I began to view more of those qualities and characteristics. Not that I've mastered them by any
Sure.
means. And there's still times that I
Yeah.
miss the mark, and there's still
No, I mean
times
it's
that,
the continual growth, right? Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So I'm curious. Okay, somebody's listening right now and they're like, "Oh, I want to try this. I want to start incorporating this." What would you envision as challenges and obstacles for them as they're trying to like do this? Maybe if it's even for just like the rest of the Lent period, right? Up, they want to try it out until Easter. You know, what do you think there are like maybe some obstacles or challenges that they might face?
Yeah, depending on, what their day has been like, every time that I begin to enter prayer, the to-do list of everything that I didn't do begins to pop in my head. And you're like, oh yeah,
Mm,
that's right. I got to send that email, and I got
yeah.
to do that. And, have to push all that to the side, the busyness from the day, because those things are going to pop in your head as soon as you're quiet and silent and take time to pause.
Mm,
And then also, depending on what emotions you're feeling, those things may come to the surface as well during that
mm,
time. Um, be mindful of that, be aware of that, and why you're experiencing those different emotions. And then you can enter into that Thanksgiving. And it could be helpful at first to write down a list of some
mm,
things that are thankful for, which can help you focus on that, and begin to take a moment to review your day and things that you're thankful for that day. So it's not just, hey, everything in my life that I'm thankful for. It's, hey, the things from today. What was
mm.
something from today, or a few
It's
things
much
from
more
today,
manageable.
yeah, that I'm thankful for. And you can keep that list, 5 to 10 things, and then because there's so many other things that we can be thankful for. But that begins the review process. Then by doing that, you're reviewing your day and you're looking for those things that you were thankful for. And then it's much easier then to enter into the rest of it. And then, like I said, that next part is just asking for God's perspective. God, give me your eyes to see myself, not the way that I should see not the way that I normally see myself, but the way that you see
Mm,
me, the way that others see me, the way that I really am. And then you begin to review your day to see, what were my attitudes and emotions throughout the day. um, did I live out or reflect God's character as described in Galatians 5 and the fruit of the Spirit, or what were the times when I didn't, and okay, what would that look like then to ask for God's forgiveness of those times where I didn't act in that way, and resolve to show up differently
Mm.
in relationships the next day and engage differently with people and with God, and be more present of his awareness and more aware of his presence, and more present in that.
Mm. I love it. I think that's such a great tool. And I just, once again, struck by the purposefulness of it. Like, okay, I'm going to be very purposeful about how I'm going to take some time in the evening. I like what you said about the like to-do list and the tasks. And it really is, I think, a mental game of being like, nope, okay, I'm going to carve out this chunk of time. It doesn't have to be like, I assume you don't take hours and hours to do this, right?
Yeah, this is typically for me maybe a 20-minute process, sometimes 15.
Yeah.
You can fit it in less time than that, but to really have that time to connect with God, 15
Yeah.
minutes set aside for this is a pretty good
Yeah.
length of time.
And it's also like very, I think some people have this hesitation with prayer time because they don't know what to say, or they don't know what to say next, or how long it's going to be, but I think there's an advantage when you're like, okay, I want to structure it for this time of night, and I want to structure it because then I'm like, okay, I know what it's going to look like. I can think through questions. I
Yeah.
can talk to God about questions. Like that's very, I think, tangible. Um, so yeah. So all right. So last question from me. We are in Lent, right? Like we talked about in the beginning. Is there any other part of like any other things in Lent that you want to highlight, or like whether it's a Bible plan or something like that you'd encourage people to do, or
Yeah, actually, right now, on our U version, so we do have a church account with U version. So if you use U version, the Bible app, frequently, uh, you can place the Ridge Community Church as my church. And what'll happen when you do that? You will see Bible reading plans that we're suggesting, or Bible reading plans that we're encouraging people to kind of read through together. This is something that I've encouraged some of our groups and group leaders to begin to read through together during this time, during this season. And there is a Bible reading plan there that you can use to just dig into and begin to experience God, be more aware of his presence, and prepare your heart for Jesus and the true meaning behind Easter in this entire season.
awesome. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for chatting about the prayer of examine and just that daily discipline and kind of prayer you go through. I'm going to be trying it out. And because I mean, I've done it a couple times, but it's never been like a regular, like a habit for me. And it sounds like I've been really intrigued to kind of try it out more regularly. So thanks for at least I'll be doing it. So
Very good.
yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Well, that was my conversation with Joe, and I just want to encourage you to give the prayer of examine a chance. You do it in the evening. I know it takes some time, but it's something that, examining your day and really seeing those areas that you can grow, but also those things that you can have joy and thankfulness about really can impact your day and your life going forward. In the show notes, you can find a link to an example of the prayer of examine, as well as a link to the YouVersion Bible app and our own plans as the Ridge Community Church. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.